Hard. All right. So for this week's discussion, the prompt was harkening back to last week's Thinking Out Loud when we went to that Mind Tools website and did like the quiz leadership evaluation, which I thought was so cool. And to talk about the criteria that we talked about in our Thinking Out Loud.
I thought it was good too, but I found it so hard to like be honest with myself about some of the questions. I was like, what do I wish I was versus what am I actually? So on some of those questions, I was like,
Wait, was the quiz what I wish I was?
no, I think it definitely was like where you are at. But like,
Okay, I was like, crap, I took that wrong.
no, yeah. Sometimes I put like, oh yeah, I do great at this, even though I kind of probably don't do so great at it. So
Yeah.
maybe my results were a little skewed.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the first of the criteria that I was taken by was the concept of emotional intelligence, because I immediately thought about our reading on practical wisdom and kind of this having to be aware of your own emotions and others' emotions and how they interact. And the article talked specifically about like being a good listener and empathy, and that just really clicked with me, like tying it back to that reading, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, so I had the exact same thing where I tied emotional intelligence back to practical wisdom. But I also, because it had the listening, I tied it to the difficult conversations. Um, right, and just understanding the importance of like your emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and how those affect your relationships. And so just how really emotional intelligence is this big part of being a leader, because you have to understand your emotions, others' emotions, and be in control of those, and not let them get out of the way. So
It's so key to good leadership. That's what this semester's been showing me.
Mm-hmm. I talked about that one too because I scored kind of low on that. So I tied it to the transformational leadership, like women as transformational leaders, because we had that text about how Coates is like, women are great at this. And then I just wrote about like, I am the worst at showing empathy. Like, I feel it and like, I understand, but like, when it comes to showing people empathy, I'm like, I probably come off so cold and like heartless. And so I kind of talked about how like just because I'm a woman doesn't mean like I can show empathy in these like leadership positions, which is what she kind of argued in the text. So I kind of argued against that for this one because obviously I'm not great at that and I definitely need to work on that. So
I remember when we did that reading, I think there was a thinking out loud prompt that was like, does studying these gender stereotypes like reinforce that? And I was like, oh, totally. Um, some people are
mm-hmm.
just more naturally good at empathy, but all of us can like grow that skill and become better at it, like every other skill.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. That's definitely a point I made too because I don't have those skills and I definitely need to work on that. So for sure. What are some of the other ones that you guys talked about in your thinking?
Well, the second one I looked at, it was kind of a easy connection for me. It was the providing a compelling vision for the future because I immediately thought of the Cotter step change process because one of those steps is you got to have a vision, and then another one of those steps is you've got to communicate that vision. And so it just kind of tied into, if you don't have a compelling vision and you can't communicate it, you can't lead people.
I definitely agree. I think when I was doing my leadership paper, like the leadership analysis, it kept coming up over and over again how like you need a good vision in order to lead because if you don't have anything for people to follow, and then that goes all the way back to that video we watched about letting people know your why, like why you do something, not just how to do it. I think that kind of connects to there too because you have to have the vision, you have to have the motivation and everything behind it in order to get people on your team or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
an important one for sure.
if you don't inspire people, then they're kind of not going to want to, they're not going to see the reasons you're asking them to do things.
Mhm.
Like the leaders and the bosses who've always inspired me the most and for whom I've worked the hardest are the ones who said, okay, this is our big goal, and these steps are going to help us achieve that, and that's why I'm asking you to do this. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. And so I wanted to.
Definitely, definitely.
So yeah, I also talked about that a little bit. I picked the different vision one, the motivating people to deliver the vision,
Yeah.
because I don't know why it was
They were
split
very
two
similar.
categories. They're the same, pretty much. But I talked about the TED Talk we watched from Simon Sink. They're doing the motivation, the like inside out motivation. And he said like the exact same thing. If you hire people who believe what you believe, they will work for you with your blood, sweat, and tears. So
Yeah.
really just on the same lines. But
I had totally forgotten about that video, but yeah, that makes sense.
I think to me, these ones are kind of different questions because I think you can provide a vision, but I think motivation is just such a different beast. Like trying to motivate people to follow that vision. I think that's like an age-old question that we might never be able to solve is like how to motivate people because it's so individual and it's so hard, I feel. So maybe that's why they split those two up.
Probably. But then I also think that sometimes if you have a compelling enough vision, that's what's going to motivate people. Is they're going to be like, "Oh, that's so cool! I want to help with that."
Yeah.
So they are pretty interconnected. And then the third one that I talked about was being a good role model. And this reminded me of the Forbes article that was like 15 ways to identify bad leaders, because one of those points was about like unethical leaders who don't have integrity, and I was like, that's like literally the opposite of what you want to do. Is to be a good role model, you need to have ethics and integrity and show people that, because then they want to follow you.
I definitely agree. When I was writing my paper, that just kept coming up over again. And if you don't keep your same morals and your same beliefs, then you're not like ethical in your decisions throughout the time of like your leadership and all of your positions. It's kind of hard to be a role model because what do people look up to if they don't know what you stand for, what you believe in? So I think that is definitely a big part of it.
And I said something about like, if you're a role model for others, then they can grow into good leaders and they'll become leaders who are good role models for others. And it'll just become this like domino effect, helping create good leaders.
Definitely.
which isn't that a style of leadership that we've talked about before? I don't remember what it's called, but there's one that is sort of that you build other leaders.
Yeah.
That was sort of like I think maybe one of our last readings, right? It was like all leadership. Was it Maxwell's reading? Like all leadership leads to other because everybody is influencing somebody somehow. So you all have to be like a positive leader.
The ladder, yeah.
I think that was the Maxwell reading. I'm like looking at this real quick.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
I think it is because he built that argument about how you can't not influence people. Whatever decisions you make influence people. So in that way, you're constantly building leadership.
Yeah, it was the Maxwell, and I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, it was like the insights about influence and how everybody influences someone, and so everybody within an organization needs to be a positive leader in order to like have an effective vision. But there we go.
I really liked that reading from last week. I feel like it kind of answered a lot of the.
It was
like,
super good.
Brought everything together for me. I really liked that one.
Yeah.
Made a lot of sense to me. I'm trying to look at the one that I had. So I did the one about providing support and stimulation. I thought that one was interesting because one of the questions that fit under there, I think, was number 5, if I'm right. If not, that might, oh, that's emotional intelligence. But question number 5, I thought was really interesting because it talked about when someone is upset, I try to understand how he or she is feeling. And then for this question, I put, like, I was confused about what the right answer would be in context of leadership, because there was another question about how like your personal feelings should impact your productivity. And I'm like, I don't know if the right answer is yes or no. Like, should we be catering? Like, obviously we should cater to people's feelings. And like, if they're having a rough time, we should obviously not push them to just keep working. But in the same sense, like, when does it become too much that like your personal feelings are conflicting with your productivity? And like, as a leader, do you need to be like, get it together almost? Like, not so as harsh as I'm making it sound, but those two questions, I didn't know what the right answer was about how we should lead our team when people have an overabundance of feelings or personal issues or stuff like that. So that was something I kind of talked about in mine.
Okay,
That
that's
makes
actually
sense.
super cool. So providing support and stimulation was also my third one that I picked. So I related it to the research on like the authenticity and shame, which is sort of what you're talking about, right? Like, how long do we let people's feelings go before we're like, okay, you have to like pull it together. And so it's a really interesting balance of where do we allow these authentic feelings to fit in before we, like, leaders have to step in and be like, hey, I'm your support group, move.
Yeah. I like how you related that one. I related it to the leading with kindness one because I thought definitely that ties kind of connected to like being there for people's feelings. But I think vulnerability is a big part of that because I didn't even really think about the other side of like the people who have to work under the leader and how they probably feel. So I like that.
Leading with kindness is a great.
I'm gonna tie it back.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm going to tie it back to the point about being a good role model. I think you have to be vulnerable yourself and say, hey, I'm having a bad day. I'm not going to be as productive as I would like to be. But also say, acknowledge that you're having a bad day and like verbalize that. But also say, but since I know I'm having a bad day, I'm going to do XYZ to try to feel better and be more productive. Or just say, you know, it is what it is. And then as people see that, they can come to you and say, hey, I'm having a rough day. Can you like give me some slack today? Or stuff like that. So I think like being vulnerable as a leader yourself would kind of help with that, being able to balance that.
and that goes back, I think, to the emotional intelligence, right? Because if you can have empathy with on both sides, right? I think both sides need empathy for each other to understand the situations. And that just in itself, I think, provides a support structure. If you know you're not the only one going through something and that you're going to work through it together.
For this one, I was reminded, I chose this as my second one. I was reminded of one of our early readings. It reminded me of it was like a leader versus like managers kind of reading, and it just basically talked about a lot of like these task allocation type problems and like who was best fit to approach different things, and that certain people were better to approach them as managers or as leaders, and that being like a manager wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think this is one of the areas where being more like a manager rather than just like like an industry leader is where you're going to find like an advantage here in this area. Is like if you're a more managerial type leader than just like a organizational or like type leader.
I definitely agree with that. I kind of related, so I talked about that text too, but I related it to, I talked about question 18. I'm not sure what that falls under. Oh, providing support and stimulation. So I talked about that question was if we should just let people who are good at what they do keep doing that, or if we should try to push them to learn new skills and challenge them. And so I talked about how maybe if we're in that more manager position, we would just let people do what they're good at and like those skills, but maybe if we were thinking of a more leadership perspective, we would challenge them to do new things. So that's how I kind of connected that text to this thinking out loud. I think that kind of goes back again to what we were talking about, if leaders make other leaders and everything like that. So. I feel like we all like have the same ideas, so now we have nothing else to talk about.
I know. I thought we might be a bit more diverse in what we picked, but we're all like this one.
Connections were just clear cut. I think that's fine if we're done. We can end a little bit early. I think this discussion is shorter anyway.
Trying to see if I have anything else.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at mine too. I feel like we missed one that I meant to say because I didn't have. There's one that I had that you guys didn't. What did I put here? The future, difficult conversations, and what was my? It's my first one because the second two, my second and third, I were the same as you guys, and we talked about those. But how am I missing what my first one is on here? Like my reading comprehension is just so bad. I'm gonna have to like read this out loud to myself. What? It's in this section. Audit. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. Yeah, I guess like goes down to the attitude and outlook one, which I guess we did as well, but what I had to talk about here, so we all did have the same ones, I guess. So I don't really have anything super interesting to say here, but I did tie this one to a couple of things in the reading that I don't think we necessarily talked about. So as far as attitude and outlook, I did tie this a little bit to our reading on creating effective change. So like there are the 8 steps to Cotter's 8 steps to effective change. I did relate that to this because outlook is one of the parts of effective change, and you have to be able to have a cohesive outlook in order to be able to achieve all of those steps in a cohesive manner. So I talked about that, and then otherwise it was just the stuff we already talked about. So I guess I don't have anything. I thought I did.
That's okay. Cool.
I think that is important though, because we did talk a little bit about vision, but I think positive outlook is kind of different than that because it's almost
like it's more the influence thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like being positive about your vision, almost having that positive outlook, then you influence people to follow you and everything like that. Like it's all just one big circle of leadership. It all circles back to it.
Yeah, and having that positive outlook will also help motivate people. If you are excited about this, then other people will be excited about it too, because that's infectious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, and that was obviously, and we already talked about it, but like Simon Sinek's kind of golden circle thing as well, where like you have to go from the outside in, you have to begin with the why. But because that's like the root of outlook and attitude, but
I feel like we have learned everything about leadership and it just all like connects. Not that I think it's possible to learn everything about it, but definitely I think we've got a good chunk of it. Mm-hmm. I think one of the criteria that we didn't really touch on, so just if anyone has anything about it, was the one about managing performance effectively. So that was question 3 and 13. Mm-hmm. So it says, I expect nothing less than top-notch results from people, and then I make exceptions to my rules and expectations. It's easier than being enforced all the time.
I specifically chose not to write about that one. Me sitting over here with delegation problems. Let's
Nice. I think my big thing, I think these are the ones that I was talking about, like how I wanted to put one thing and I probably am really another thing, especially when it comes to making exceptions to the rules. I was like, no, I always enforce the rules. I'm the enforcer, but I think sometimes I do crack under like the pressure of people wanting things. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine, do whatever you want, even though maybe that goes against rules or expectations we'd set for the team or something like that. So
I managed a bunch of 16-year-olds, and let me tell you, when some of those girls came up to me and were just like, but Brittany, please, and like literally begged me for 5 minutes, I was like, fine.
yeah. I think I definitely have that problem, but I just crack sometimes. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what that would tie to. What would that tie to in their text?
It's empathy, I think, because I like got it. I was like, I'm the manager. I'm supposed to be like strict and in charge, but I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, true. Too much empathy. This is where we need to be cold hard killers so we can stick to the
You need to find the balance.
That's where you say, I understand where you're coming from. However, you knew about these expectations beforehand.
Allison's got it down.
I have younger brothers.
The only thing I can kind of think of maybe that it also might have been was like when we listened to that, it was like a TED talk by the UCLA basketball coach. It was like John Stodden or something.
John Wooden?
Wooden, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was it. I couldn't remember exactly. He talked about like managing performance effectively and like what your kind of expectations should be of yourself and of others. And while like there were definitely things I agreed with that he said, there are also things I disagreed with, and I think that overall we can like draw our own conclusions about what his opinion was on some of those things. But I think he did talk about it, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, when you bring that up, it kind of reminds me about how he had set expectations and he widely communicated those expectations. Like his players knew like they needed to be on time, they needed to be wearing this, like they needed to follow these rules. And I think that's probably the important part about not making exceptions, is knowing that everybody knows the expectations. So I think that's kind of what he conveyed to me in that video.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I feel good about all of this.
There's actually one more question that I just want to know your guys' opinion on, because I just read it again and it made me kind of laugh. So what did you guys think about the question that said, I expect people to work harder than I do? What did you guys kind of discuss for that one?
My favorite leaders are the ones who say, I will never ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I try to take that philosophy into everything. Because otherwise it just seems like you're sitting back and like, oh, you do the work. I'll just sit here and take all the credit for it.
Yeah, sure. And I feel like sometimes that's the stereotypical leadership kind of what they portray, is like they just delegate everything and then they watch it all unfold before them. So yeah, I like what you're saying.
Yeah, I always, it's like my personal philosophy to be the hardest working person in the room, right? Like I should always be doing the most work, which isn't always great as a leader, right? Like you have to have some delegation. And so I do think there is a downside to that, which is why I sort of avoided those two questions. Because I'm like, this is my greatest weakness right here in leadership.
I feel like if everyone had that mindset though, that I should be doing the most work, like I should be working the hardest, like could you imagine the stuff people could get done if everyone expected themselves to be working the hardest? Like some pretty great things, I think.
Yeah,
I didn't write about
it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I didn't really write about it necessarily, but I guess like if I were to my answers in the quiz and just thinking about it, I probably think unlike you guys, I do think sometimes I do expect like about the same amount of work out of people as myself a lot of times. And like I don't know if I ask for more. I think that's a really introspective question. That's probably hard for anybody within themselves to like honestly answer. I feel like I don't, but I do think that I expect I guess it depends on the person and like the situation, obviously, but I do think in many situations I expect somebody to like be putting roughly the same amount of effort that I am into a project. Um, Particularly because I feel like in a lot of situations, even though maybe I'm the leader, like we're all supposed to be doing different things, and I want each part of the cohesive thing to be done just as great as all the other parts. And so I do usually expect people to try just as hard as I do, but at the same time I don't think I'm like, God's gift to earth or anything like that either. So I don't know that like my ability is not necessarily like that high a lot of times. So I don't even know if like me expecting that from people is like a huge ask, but that's what I feel. And um, I think in some ways that's a weakness, but I think it's an advantageous outlook sometimes as well.
I think if that could like be the reality that everyone puts in the same amount of work and like you expect people to work just as much as you, like that would be perfect. I just like think of group projects where like I expect like the work to be divided equally and everyone to work, and then like in the end I'm doing the whole project by myself because nobody like put in the effort. But like if we could do what you were talking about, like I think it would lead to more productivity for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. In a perfect world where everyone does their equal part of a group project.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely parts where it's like that works, and I guess there are probably areas where like the leader really does need to do more work, but I've just never really been in that type of situation that I can think of. I've never been like such a high level leader that I needed to be like that. Like I was never like the president of the United States or anything, where it's like I should probably be like doing a lot more work than everyone else, like it's just like group projects and things that I was doing in school. And so I think I just expected the same amount between all of us, but
Yeah. Well, I always just think of, I've worked for 2 summers at the Shakespeare Festival here. And my second summer, I was promoted to be a supervisor. And so I had a lot more responsibility. I was like in charge of things. Um, I'm a house manager. It's like an usher. And so there would be times where like I would need something to be done and I would have to ask someone else in my team to do that because I was like, I literally cannot do this right now because I'm doing 50 other things right now. So I had to be really good at delegating and being like, can you go handle this? Or can you go do this?
I think that's a good point, like spreading out those expectations and trying to even out that work. I think that's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of it comes from, is that we can set these expectations for ourselves, but those realities will change, right? So your expectation is different from what the reality is. So I always expect myself to do the most work, but that may not always be the reality, right? Because I may have to delegate a good chunk of it away because something may take way longer than I expected to, right?
Yeah.
And so I think your expectations and reality are different. So maybe, I don't know, like there's 2 different sections to this question.
You can have high expectations, but also understand that reality is different.
High expectations, but no reality is a thing.
Reality just hits you.
For sure. Okay. That's all I had then. That was my last one that I was kind of worrying about.
Cool. Do we have anything else anyone wanted to cover? I feel good. We had a good discussion.
Good discussion.
I learned a lot. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Stop